Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, it's a great honor for me to speak here today in this hall. On the one hand, I feel gratitude to the UN General Assembly for supporting Ukraine throughout these 12 years of unprovoked, unjust, and barbaric Russian aggression against Ukraine. On the other hand, I cannot ignore the tragic pain and the tragic price Ukrainians do pay every single day for our freedom, for our independence, for our sovereignty and territorial integrity, but also for the freedom of the entire democratic world. Just as I was coming to New York, a little girl, Angelina, was laid to rest in Kiev. She was only 2 years old. She was born during the Russian aggression, and she was brutally murdered by Russia on August 28th, together with other 24 civilians sleeping in their homes. And yesterday, 9 people were killed in Konstantinivka, a city in Donetsk region, again following heavy artillery shelling by Russia. As we speak, Russia launched a missile attack on Chernihiv. Every single day, every single moment. And Russian goals for these 12 years hasn't changed. Russian strategy hasn't changed. To destroy Ukraine as a country, to destroy Ukraine as a nation. And there should be no illusions about this, and no wishful thinking. Mr. President, since I last stood up in this hall when we adopted the UNGA resolution on just, comprehensive, lasting peace for Ukraine on 24th February this year, the security situation has sharply deteriorated. Just on 2nd and 3rd September this year, Russia launched nearly 500 drones and more than 20 missiles at Ukrainian cities. Again, yet another proof that Russia doesn't seek peace. It wants to continue the war. We deeply value the diplomatic efforts by the United States, Europe, by other nations and friends and allies and partners who support Ukraine. Ukraine remains committed to peace and diplomacy. Yet, Russia's brazenness striking our cities in broad daylight, while the leader of Russia spreads propaganda at the SCO summit in China, cannot be ignored. This war has nothing to do with so-called denazification, with NATO, or any false security concerns. This war has to do with Russia's authoritarian regime pursuing imperial ambitions and trying to erase Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian nation. And Russia cannot wage this war alone. Its aggression is sustained by drones from Iran, arms and personnel from the DPRK, in all violation of Security Council resolutions, as well as the support of the Chinese companies. Only decisive global pressure, especially on Russia's war economy, can cut off these lifelines and end Moscow's campaign of terror. Distinguished members, occupation does not end the war. It conceals suffering and prepares the ground for further assault and aggression. And Russia makes no secret of its ambitions. At a recent Defense Ministry meeting, a map behind General Gerasimov erased not only occupied areas, but also Kharkiv, Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Kherson, a clear sign of Moscow's plans. Occupation is never the end. It is always a staging ground for another assault. And wherever Russia occupies, we witness grave human rights violations in the temporarily occupied Crimea, in some parts of Donbass, tortures, enforced disappearances, grave violations of the rights of children. And they're all documented by the UN and others for the past 12 years. Thousands of Ukrainians remain in Russian captivity, tortured and starved, denied contact with their families. Russia blocks UN and RCSC access to conceal its crimes because Russia does not want the world to know the truth about its heinous crimes. Crime of aggression, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, which Russia keeps on committing on an industrial scale. The UN Secretary General's latest report confirms Russia's systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Ukrainian prosecutors have already recorded 372 cases involving men, women, and also children. We demand the immediate release of all Ukrainian civilians held in Russian torture chambers and call for substantial international pressure to ensure that Russia complies with the international humanitarian law. Mr. President, perhaps the most heartbreaking impact of this war is on our children. Since the full-scale invasion, at least 648 children have been killed and over 2,100 wounded. Millions more endure violence, displacement, disrupted education, and mental trauma. Russia has deported at least 20,000 Ukrainian children from temporarily occupied territories in grave breach of international law. Russia erases their identity, changes their personal data. This is the largest state abduction operation in the world history. A state that abducts and kills our children cannot pretend to wave the UN flag of peace. Ukraine, therefore, calls on the UN to suspend Russia from UN peacekeeping operation. Let me say a few examples. The case of 16-year-old Viktor Azarovsky, seized in occupied Melitopol, tortured, and sent to notorious detention center. Other children, such as Oleg Shokolad and Denis Vasilika, were arrested as minors and remain in custody. Testimonies confirm that boys like Pavlo Hrimaka and Danilo Dacho were killed in custody, and they were just children. This is about humanity. Not a single child should be separated from the parents. Not a single child should endure such pain. This is genocide, and therefore the International Criminal Court has issued 2 arrest warrants on Russian leader and on Maria Lvova-Belova for crimes against Ukrainian children. Accountability should follow. Ukraine is grateful to all the countries and organizations who joined the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children, co-chaired by Ukraine and Canada. But we need to do more. We need to return each and every child back home. Our red lines are very clear. Children are the most vulnerable group. They are not negotiable. Ukrainian children are non-negotiable. They should be returned prior to any peace talks, unconditionally. Not a single child should endure such trauma as Ukrainian children do. Distinguished members, Russia is pursuing a deliberate policy of forced demographic change in occupied territories, deporting Ukrainians to remote Russian areas while resettling Russian citizens in their homes. In Crimea, occupied temporarily since 2014, this policy has been especially severe. The peninsula, once a vibrant hub of culture and diversity, has been turned into open-air prison. Political persecution is a daily reality. Today, 248 Ukrainian citizens, including 163 Crimean Tatars, the indigenous people of Crimea, languish in prisons and detention centers. Since the full-scale invasion, Russia has multiplied its political prisoners, abducting activists, human rights activists, volunteers, journalists, local officers, and former servicemen. Many have been transferred to Crimea or Russia. The fate of many is unknown. Consider one case, Apas Kurtamer, the youngest Crimean Tatar political prisoner. He just turned 21 in a maximum security colony. His only crime, in inverted commas, was lending a friend 500 hryvnias, almost $12. Russia called it terrorism financing and sentenced him to 7 years in prison. This is the daily reality of the occupation. Religious minorities, Orthodox, Greek Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Catholics face harassment, confiscation of property, and destruction of places of worship. Russia even illegally conscripts Ukrainians from occupied territories, forcing them to fight against Ukraine. Dear colleagues, Ukraine has remained very transparent throughout the war. We invited UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission and cooperate fully with UN, ICC, and different NGOs. Russia, on contrary, conceals its crimes, bans monitors, silences independent voices. Yet the evidence for these 12 years is overwhelming, and accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity by Russia is inevitable. Together with our partners, Ukraine will pursue justice for every crime. We're grateful to each and every delegation who supported the establishment of the Special Tribunal on the crime of aggression against Russia. It is extremely important and landmark event. We need to bring all Russian war criminals to responsibility. Dear colleagues, for over 3 years, Russia has illegally occupied the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest. It has turned the site into a military base and a nuclear shield for shelling, while persecuting Ukrainian staff who refuse to collaborate. The risk of catastrophe is real. Any restart of the plant's reactors is possible only after the authority of Ukraine's legitimate regulator, not under Russian occupation. The IAEA must have full, unhindered access to all areas of the plant, with monitoring rotations conducted exclusively throughout Ukraine-controlled territory. Mr. President, it is impossible to advance peace if one party, one side refuses to engage honestly. Talks with Russia will only succeed if backed by serious pressure. Otherwise, Moscow will only continue its aggression. We must abandon illusions. There must be no wishful thinking. Russia will not stop by itself. It will stop only when we, as an international community, do stop Russia, by common pressure, including sanction pressure on Russia, political, economic, financial. It's not to block the dialogue. It's to compel Russia, to force Russia to peace. But before that, there should be a first step, truce or ceasefire in place, unconditional, in the sky, on the land, at the sea. This is the first step that will open the door to diplomacy. Second, Ukraine needs clear security guarantees. And as we speak, the coalition of willing is taking place in Paris, and I'm grateful to the French and UK leadership in this, and all the countries participating. We need binding, legally binding, robust, solid security guarantees that will be like Article 5 of NATO. We need a mission, military contingent of allied forces on the ground. Otherwise, the war will continue. Ukraine will never recognize the temporarily occupied territories as Russian. Crimea, like all other parts of temporarily occupied areas, was, is, and will always be Ukraine. No matter how long will it take, Ukraine will fight for the territorial integrity, restoration of our country. Our vision is very clear. Ukraine is not an obstacle to peace. We are ready to meet in any format. We are ready to start talking about the peace settlement. But there should be truce, there should be legally binding security guarantees, there should be Russian responsibility. Russia should withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine. That's clear. No matter what, Ukrainian nation is extremely resilient and will fight for our freedom, because this is the only country that we have. This is our home, this is our family. And let me reassure you, Russia is not winning. It doesn't have any strategic advances anywhere. This is propaganda and disinformation that Russia spreads among different countries and partners. Russia is not winning. And Ukraine is capable of winning this war if we have necessary military aid, air defense, security guarantees. Mr. President, if Russia goes unpunished, it will seek to expand the war to the West and to other countries. We need to raise the cost of aggression for Russia. Otherwise, Russia will not stop. And as we approach to the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter, we should ask ourselves, are we doing enough to stop Russia? Is 12 years enough to stop Russia? Are we doing enough to bring Russia to responsibility? Every single day, our children, innocent civilians, are being killed in the middle of Europe. Dear colleagues, we urge you to mobilize more efforts to support Ukraine, militarily, politically, financially, and in terms of security guarantees. Ukraine shall prevail. Democracy shall prevail. Thank you.